Good afternoon to those of you watching on the East Coast, and good morning to those in the Central and the Pacific time zones, as well to those watching in Europe and Israel. I want to wish you a good evening. Today we're blessed to have really one of God's angels, one of the unique, special people that the Jewish people have, and that's Rabbi Doron Perez. Rabbi Perez, over the years, built up South African Jewry as a mentor, as an educator, as a leader to the communities in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, and to the youth of South Africa. Many have made Aliyah, who ended up settling in Israel. Rabbi Doron Perez was recruited by World Mizrachi, the religious Zionist movement, to be its leader, its international leader. And he has incredible relations with communities throughout the length and breadth of North America, Europe, South Africa, Australia, and of course, many in Israel itself. He's a person that's been a guide, a friend, a mentor to many, and is a man who's created bridges, built bridges throughout the community to different and diverse backgrounds, to different and diverse groups within Israeli society and within world Jewry. Tragically, on October 7th, Rabbi Doron Perez's son, Daniel, who he'll speak about, who was a commander, was one of those after an incredibly gallant battle that was taken as one of the hostages. And that story has really changed the life of the Perez family and changed the life of Israel. And we're very grateful that Rabbi Perez right now is making time with us, because literally after this briefing, he is going in to meet with leaders of Knesset, leaders with the Israeli administration regarding the hostage talks. And at this point, we want to hand it over to Rabbi Doron Perez.
Thank you, Rabbi Weil. I really deeply appreciate your very kind and generous introduction. Thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor and zchut to speak to leaders and members of the Friends of the Israeli Defense Force, perhaps one of the most important organizations in the world today. The Israeli Defense Force needs friends. It's the blood libel of our generation, the state of Israel in general, and the FIDF, the IDF in particular. Any person who is a fair-minded person who justice and morality is something just dear to them should be a friend of the FIDF, but a friend of the IDF and part of the FIDF. But of course, that's not always the case. I just want to thank my friend and colleague, Rabbi Steve Weil, who we had quite a bit to do with each other when Rabbi Weil was his leadership position at the OU, and then moved to the FIDF to play a leadership role there. And the movement is very blessed to have you, Rabbi Weil, and as are the Jewish people. And it really is a zchut for me to be able to join friends of the Israeli Defense Force at this particular time. As Rabbi Weil said, I'm literally here in one of the government ministry offices. The parents of the soldiers are meeting every day, multiple times a day, with many members of the cabinet and the government, because any deal that would be ratified would need to be ratified by the government, and therefore we've made a decision as the family of the soldiers to meet as many ministers as possible. And this meeting is starting at the same time, but I did tell them I was going to be late. Because every time with Danielle, we try to find another time. Every time, sort of the coming weeks, there seems to be something at this time. So forgive me that I'll need to be about 20 or 25 minutes. I'll speak for about 10 minutes and leave time for questions. So as Rabbi Weil said, the most important thing I and we are focused on as parents of soldiers is our angst and concern that, as we know, Hamas wants to leave the soldiers to the end, and they see them as the most valuable. And we are deeply concerned for a number of reasons, which I'll articulate in a moment, that without a lot of proactive investment on Israel's side, they will be left for the end, and we never know when that end will be, if at all. So just a little bit about our son. As Rabbi Weil said, our son Daniel, we have two sons and two daughters. Our two sons are both officers in the Israeli army. Our older son Yonatan in the paratroopers, and our younger son Daniel, a commander in the tank corps. Both fought on October 7th, Simchat Torah,
Daniel was positioned with his tank crew on the Nachal Oz base, where he had been based since June, as part of his what's called a border service. And Jonathan, our older son, on that day was positioned. He is a company commander, has 150 soldiers who he's training then for their basic and advanced training. On that particular Shabbat, he was at home with his then fiancée in our home. By the end of the day, Jonathan had gone really quickly to the front, to the Gaza border, as soon as he heard at 8 a.m. what was going on. And by the end of the day, we actually have had 2 injured sons. Jonathan was injured and found himself in Soroka Hospital, which we went to visit him after Shabbat. And only by the grace of God was he shot through his thigh, and without hitting any of the main arteries. A number of soldiers died from being shot in the main artery in the leg. It's a very, very dangerous injury. And just by the grace of God, although many soldiers around him were killed and injured, he thankfully was only moderately to lightly injured. I was in fact talking to somebody yesterday who was saying that of the soldiers who came as early as my son did, a very, very large portion of them were either killed or badly wounded. And it's just by the grace of God, because it was a time at, before 9 a.m. when we didn't really know what was going on. And they were literally fighting blind, not knowing where terrorists were, all around the Gaza envelope. So by the grace of God, Jonathan was lightly injured, shot through the thigh in Soroka Hospital. Unfortunately, our youngest son, Daniel, was not as lucky. We found out 6 weeks later that he had also been injured on the day, after gallantly and valiantly placing their tank in between the many hundreds, eventually thousands, of between 600 and 1,000 Nukhba terrorists eventually came in the area of Nachal Oz. And at the time, they defended very valiantly for a number of hours until their tank was overrun between the border and Nachal Oz. And unfortunately, our son and 2 other soldiers were taken hostage. I believe on Wednesday you had my friend and colleague, not colleague, but my friend and fellow hostage father, Ruby Khain, speak to himself as an American citizen. And Itai is actually outside. We're going to be in the same meeting in a moment. We've, of course, become like family. There are 3 families with 4 soldiers in every tank. 1 soldier was killed. His name is Tomer Leibovitz, Zichrono Livracha, who was found in the tank and buried soon thereafterwards. And our son, Daniel, the commander, along with Itai and Matan, are still almost 150 days later missing. Our son, as mentioned, he was injured on the day. We know that somewhere after 9 o'clock in the morning, having been in the tank for a number of hours, the tank was overrun, and they were taken hostage. They were declared as missing for 3 weeks, and thereafter changed to assumed taken captive and now taken captive. We know nothing in the last 150 days almost. The only thing we know is that our son was injured. No hostages have seen him. No terrorists have yet given any testimony which changes anything about him. And so that is our situation. And what we decided about 6 weeks ago is that the parents of the soldiers are going to be till the end, leave them until the end. And that is our really big concern. So we decided 6 weeks out. I mean, I'm not sure you know, but
Rabbi
many
Perez,
of the soldiers.
I apologize. It froze for a little while. Could you go back problem. after describing that it was determined that he was missing in action? However, you've never heard anything, not through any interrogation of the terrorist or anything. We don't know one way or the other any identification or anyone who's seen him. At that point, it froze. Okay. If you could continue.
Okay, sure. So we know nothing in the last 150 days. What we have done is we have made a decision, the families of the soldiers, to campaign as
the family and parents of male soldiers. We know that Hamas wants to leave them to the end. We know that that is their standpoint, and they want to exact the highest price. We, in fact, only until 6 weeks ago, we decided, all of us, to publicize the pictures of our children. We, most of the hostage sort of, campaign has not been around soldiers. We were fearful to sort of give Hamas any information. We also took directives and advice from the Ministry of Defense. But around 6 weeks ago, we decided, also having liaised with the Ministry of Defense and people involved in negotiation, that we felt that our children, by the price of keeping quiet and not saying anything about them, is beginning to be more than the price of actually speaking about them, because they're just not spoken about. And we know that the Chayalot, the female soldiers, Hamas has in principle agreed to view not as soldiers but as females, and are supposed to be part, if there will be a deal, of the first humanitarian stage of this next deal, should it come about. So, to cut a long story short, we have decided to campaign, and since that moment, we got together as a group of all the soldiers, and we meet every day, multiple times a day, with whoever will meet us, which is pretty much anyone we ask for. There's 37 or 38 ministers. We meet with them, including the heads of the Mossad and the Shabak and the army and whoever we can. And our aim is to campaign on behalf of our children. That Hamas would like our children to remain to the end doesn't mean that Israel should. Israel has a motto, sorry about that, of not leaving lo mafkirim chayalim. We don't leave soldiers, behind. And we feel specifically at this juncture, where over almost 100 days have passed since the last deal, we feel at this point, to distinguish between blood and blood, to distinguish between different hostages categories. It may be a death, a stroke of death for those who remain behind. I personally, and pretty much all of us, were very supportive of the first hostage deal for a number of reasons. Firstly, it was early on. We were able to get, the deal was supposed to release 40 children and 60 women. It made sense. Israel also paid a relatively low price, 10 days of stopping, and for each day, 10 hostages. It's very different this time around. We are more than 3 months later. Many have died. We haven't released many in heroic activities. There have been the 1 or 2 incidents. Many more have been declared dead in captivity, over 30. We also, what's being spoken about now is I know that it has. Give me a moment. Sorry. Yeah, no, it'll come back in a moment. Sorry. Give me 1 moment. I know it's frozen. Has it frozen for a while? It'll come back in 1 moment.
Right now.
Okay, there we go.
Again.
Yeah, we're back. Yeah, we're back. All right, no problem. So, just to say that, I just want to see where I was at. Yes. So now that it's almost 100 days later, we're very concerned that not only 100 days later, but waiting for giving Hamas 30 to 40 days to regroup and to place, our children who are not released even further away from safety is really a difficult pill to swallow. We believe that if there is going to be stages in this deal, we believe that the following needs to take place. Number one, there needs to be an understanding that information needs to be provided of all the hostages. At the moment, we know nothing about our children. Hamas know to keep all the information very close to them. So if they are going to release women, hopefully the remaining 2 children, Ariel and Kirbibas, some of the injured, and elderly, there's still going to remain many over there. If we don't know who they are, if we don't know anything about them, the minimum humanitarian requirement should be to provide information and to make it a red line. So we believe the following 3 conditions. Number one, if there are injured soldiers soldiers, they should be released as well. It's as humanitarian as everyone else. Number two, there should be information about everyone, including all the male soldiers from the first round, and there should be some type of arrangement regarding the soldiers going forward, meaning some type of overall arrangement regarding everyone. And I'll just say my final comment before opening this, for questions is, since this first round is considered humanitarian, we're very concerned that if, please God, all women, children, and the elderly are out, and all that are left are some male Jewish soldiers, Biden has an election year, and we're very concerned that the pressure of geopolitics, if it's only 30 or 40, male men, many of whom are soldiers, which are remaining, we fear that they will not be seen as humanitarian, and and Israel will be pressurized to compromise. And this is our big concern. And this is why we are campaigning fiercely. And there's general agreement amongst all the hostage families as well that we need to ensure that this next arrangement needs to include everyone in some way. And this is what we're campaigning for with all the government ministers. So I'll leave it at that. There's so much more to say, but I'll rather open up for questions for you. We can have about 10 minutes of questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm very comfortable to answer any question.
I knew for many years Yonah Baumel, the father of Zachary Baumel. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time we had Yonah and Miriam spend a weekend with us in our community. And they said, you don't understand what it's like when the phone rings. To you, a phone ringing is a phone ringing. To us, we go into a state of paralysis. Is that going to be the call? Are we going to hear that our son is alive and that he's been liberated, redeemed? Are we going to hear that our son is no longer alive and at least we're going to have a sense of closure and we can move forward? But they said this sense of not knowing and just being in a state of not knowing and just yearning to hear information, what a person who's not in our shoes doesn't understand what that does to a person. And I remember, that describing this to us. If you can share with us, because we had the opportunity to see how the unity amongst the hostage families, the incredible engagement the hostage families have been doing, not only to fellow Israelis, but on multiple nations' trips, on behalf of their children, on behalf of all of the hostages, what they're doing. If you can describe to us what you are going through, what other families are going through, to sensitize us, because unfortunately we may see today is 148, today is 152, but we don't have the sensitivity that we need when it comes to what you're experiencing and what you're going through.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very hard sentiment to explain. It's exactly what you said about the Baumel family. It's unimaginable for me to think of a family going through that for months, years, and decades. It's just unimaginable. Even when families know that their son is deceased, such as the Golden family and the Shaul family, which is almost 10 years. And they come to all the meetings with us, and it's just very painful to see. But I think the main challenge is what you highlighted, is just this lack of knowing. You just know absolutely nothing. Has your son, God forbid, been deceased from October 7th? Did he recover from his injury, and has he been okay since then? And where is he, and what's he going through? And at any, you could be, as you say, the call could be, please God, he's been released. Please God, there's information about him and he's healthy. Please God, chas v'shalom. And it's just such a crazy reality. I have by and large found that, I see, as we've got to know many of the families, I think the hardest nisayon as a general rule is for the mothers. I've spoken about it quite a lot. And I give the example of my wife and I see it with many other families. One handles this lack of, information and concern for our children the way one, I think, has handled it before. I often say I've never been particularly worried about what Daniel eats, even though he's a particular eater, and whether he's hot or cold, even though he doesn't particularly like the cold. And I've never really worried about it. Every day in the army, I talk to him about what he's doing in the army and what exercises he's doing, and how he's progressing in the army, and about leadership, etc. My wife, almost every single day, would speak to Daniel about his eating and his warm and cold, etc. So when that's how you've dealt with it until now, this impossible situation of wondering, I look at my wife and I see the same almost with every family that I encounter, that it's difficult to take a shower without thinking, is your son warm? It's difficult to eat anything and swallow anything without asking, without feeling, just sometimes crying, like, is your son eating or not? And it's a daily and moment to moment struggle of just keeping your mind focused. It's really challenging, and sometimes I succeed more than others. I'm able, as a general rule, to compartmentalize, but it's really, really challenging. And I think it's this ongoing challenge of just keeping your thoughts in check, because if one doesn't keep one's thoughts in check, then as I say, it not keeping our thoughts in check doesn't help our son, and it will destroy me. So I think it's a daily struggle to keep our thoughts in the right place and ensure that we are, keeping our thoughts in check. I often think of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he famously says that what he calls the last freedom that nobody can ever take away from a human being is their choice of how to react, and specifically what to think in any situation. He said famously that he saw every external and circumstantial freedom taken away from a person, but they still have, even in the impossible situation in the extermination of concentration camps, the courageous choice to think about how to handle things. He famously says that he saw some prisoners give away their last piece of bread, and he saw others steal somebody else's last piece of bread. And ultimately, the moral choices we make and how we choose to think about things, I think, is our final human freedom. And I just feel in this particular situation, we don't have the luxury of not trying to function at our very, very best. And it's excruciating. It is. But I have felt that the human spirit is much stronger than one would think. There's a lot of evidence in psychology that people are a lot more resilient than we think we are, and are able to handle situations that we wouldn't have thought we were able to handle. And as Mrs. Baumel said, and we, God forbid, a million times hope never to be in that situation of the months, years, and decades of this impossible situation. We know that Yaakov Avinu, who over 20 years, his children told him, Taraf Yosef, that Yosef had been eaten by an animal, or that was meaning the children showed him the torn, bloody coat of Joseph, and Jacob assumed that he had been torn apart by an animal, but he didn't know. And therefore, Chazal speak about Jacob's life for those 20 years of just not seeing a body, not having a burial, not knowing what really happened with Yosef. There was always a doubt, to the extent that when Yosef stood before Pharaoh, he said the very, very difficult words of that his days were, Ma'atim v'Raim, fewer than his parent, father and grandfather, and difficult days. And in no small measure because of the incredible nisayon of not knowing what happened with Yosef for those decades. So it is an excruciating challenge. Thankfully, we have only been through this for less than 150 days. We hope and pray that it'll end very soon. And as I said, we're campaigning very, very hard. It's hard for me to imagine people living like this the way Baumels and other families have, and we hope and pray that that won't be our lot. And we hope and pray that this opportunity that we now have, that hopefully, this war will only be over when the last of the 134 hostages have come out, every single one of them. And Israel has also managed to not only release every single one of them, but to ensure that such a such an invasion can never happen again.
You have spent your life being there for others. You spent your life listening, caring, mentoring others. In this time of challenge, if you can speak about how people have engaged you, your wife, your children, how the nation has embraced you, the other hostages, some of the experiences that you've had, meeting strangers, meeting ministers, meeting people from the military, from all segments of life. What has that been like?
Look, for me, I think, for me personally, I can say that there's a certain comfort in not having to deal with this on your own. I can't begin to imagine what the Shalit family went through, where it was one person and it all depended on them, and they were going through it alone and in many ways fighting the system. We, unfortunately for the Jewish people, there are 240 hostages and now 134. But for us who are going through this challenge, there's a certain comfort in that you're not suffering alone. You don't have to campaign alone. It's not all dependent on you, meaning there are other people, first and foremost, Imanachi Batzara, who literally are in the same tzara as you, and therefore you're going through this with many people, and it's not, one's not alone in it, number one. Number two, because it's such an extreme and outrageous, experience, and it's in many ways many of our worst nightmare we have felt from people across Israel, from every walk of life and across the world, the Jewish world particularly, but also beyond, but certainly the Jewish world, just an incredible sense of empathy and imanochi b'tzara that we're together in it. And I think for us, the myriads of tefillot and messages, and every single day there's a different message on multiple messages and initiatives and Tehillim groups and prayer services and mitzvot and all types of things happening all around Israel and around the world, where we don't feel alone. And I think the aloneness is something really, really challenging. But I think because it's been such a shock and there's so many, there definitely has been this tremendous sense of redemption from loneliness. As painful as it is, we're not going through it alone. The others going through it with us, and everybody on some level is going through it. And I think the many, I have the privilege of being the chairman of World Mizrachi, and we alone have 5 solidarity groups a week coming here. And I know, Rabbi Steve, you were here with the Conference of Presidents, and so many other organizations are bringing out so many solidarity groups, schools and shuls and organizations. And it's just the sense that I felt of, as painful as it is, and it's been incredibly painful, 2 things that have come out of this have been an incredible self-sacrifice. Our 2 sons put their lives on the line to save people they didn't know, and thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians did the same on that day, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers subsequently. And this has brought out an incredible steel and determination and self-sacrifice and courage and heroism for the Jewish people of one for all and all for one. And at the same time, it has also brought out an incredible unity. I know we were told by some of the leadership of the military establishment that they know for a fact from documents that they found that Sinwar and the leadership of Hamas did not imagine that there would be such an immediate response after all of the political issues that have been with judicial reform and all the elections for the last number of years. They didn't imagine there would be such an immediate response of people coming from around the world. They didn't think there would be a significant land invasion. They didn't think that it would be for so long. They didn't think it would continue after the first stop. They didn't think it would be going down tunnel by tunnel. And I think they have found, and Jews from around the world, so I think we've found in this pain an incredible resilience, unity, courage and determination. And therefore, for me, with all the pain, it gives me tremendous hope and a zchut to feel part of such a people. And despite the pain and difficulty, we unfortunately are part of a people who unfortunately know perhaps more than any other what pain and difficulty is, and are able somehow to bounce back from pain and difficulty with resilience and with hopefulness and never with despair. And with all the pain, I do feel that the zchut of the unity and the tefillot and the afrashat challah and the acts of chesed and the solidarity and the messages, and we hope and pray of feeling ish echad b'lev echad. We hope and pray that will be a militz yosher for all of our children and protect all of our soldiers, which are putting their lives on the line, and Bezrat Hashem be able to bring them all back very, very soon and safely, Bezrat Hashem.
Rabbi Perez, we know that you have to go into the meeting. The very last question is a charge of action. Though between the live listeners and between those watching the video come out this afternoon, what is it? What is it that you would leave the 3,000 people that are listening to this? The message. What more do we need to be doing, and what kind of actions do we need to be taking to support your family, to support our children who right now are being held in Gaza?
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing, I think for all the hostage families, I think, is to campaign with unity to any possible decision makers that you have a connection with, be it senators, congressmen, governors, decision makers, social influencers. We have seen during this challenging war that things that should be so obvious, we saw from the 3 university presidents, things that should be so obvious in terms of black and white morality are not so obvious. As certain thinkers have said, the problem with common sense is it's not so common. And we've seen that often it doesn't matter what a person's station and education is in life, there's often a lot of moral, a lack of moral clarity. And I think that whoever can campaign with clarity, I think Jews need to stand up proud, especially at this time. I think it's a watershed moment for the Jewish world with anti-Semitism around the world, to be confident, not to be reckless, but to be confident and stand up for each other as one people, and to be able to campaign for each other. And I would say to campaign with whatever decision makers there are, to speak truth about the moral, of the one people who's doing everything it can to save human life, to release its hostages, which are being held in the most inhumane way without any basic humanitarian needs, and doing everything to reduce civilian loss while, having the double mission of releasing all the hostages and ensuring that such a danger doesn't happen again, not to mention 120,000 people which were removed from their homes and need to come back. So I think being able to speak clearly with truth and being able to campaign, especially in the United States, Israel's greatest ally, that the administration and leadership should not pressurize Israel to end this war on any level until 2 things happen: that every hostage is out, and there is never the danger of Hamas to do this again. And it's the most fair requirement for any country. And I think that is absolutely critical, is to just to rally together with clarity, that if anyone needs to be pressurized, it's only Hamas to release hostages, to surrender, to find some type of way of an amicable surrender for them, but no way to pressurize Israel to stop this war. It doesn't matter if it's only men left and only soldiers. I would say that what can be more humanitarian than a young man putting his life in the line during an illegal invasion into Israeli territory when there's a ceasefire, and going and trying everything in his power to stand between murderous terrorists and innocent civilians. There's no more humanitarian act than that. That is not an act of war. It's not a soldier who is invading another country or fighting in enemy territory. These are young men who put their lives on the line to save people they didn't know. So there's nothing more humanitarian than that. And I think to campaign wherever you can, of course, over and above the prayers and the mitzvot and all the spiritual activity, but I think the practical political activism to ensure that to stand up for Israel and to ensure with all decision makers that only Hamas should be pressurized to return all of our hostages, and to ensure that such a terror threat never exists on Israel's doorsteps.
Rabbi Perez, thank you. And you're a role model as a human being, as a Jew, as an Israeli, to all of us. And we're profoundly grateful that you took the time to engage us. And our responsibility is to act, and to take your urge and to take it seriously.
Thank you very much. And yishar koach to all the friends of the IDF. As I say, the IDF is the greatest moral army and the biggest privilege of statehood that we have today. And it's an absolute blood libel that our young men and women who do everything they can to defend the life and the value of life and reduce civilian life more than anyone else, that they are the focus of such a blood libel and such a demonization is one of the great ironies of history. And Yishar Koch to all of you for being friends of the IDF and to supporting the IDF and doing all we can to stand together. Thank you very much, Rabbi Weil, and to all of you listening. Thank you.
At this point in time, our thoughts and our actions have to be to support Rabbi Perez and every one of the hostages. We can't sleep at night when they can't sleep at night. We can't function, they can function. You heard an incredibly heroic man, Rabbi Perez, right now. Thank you. We'll be back on Wednesday. Wishing everyone a good week, a meaningful week, a week in which we support the families of the hostages, in which we support Israel and the soldiers of the IDF. Thank you.